Good morning, all dignitaries and delegates present here. Welcome back once again. I am Meenakshi Sharma, Assistant Professor, ITS College of Pharmacy, along with my co-host Dr. Neelam Singh. Welcome our next speaker of the online 5 days FDP on drug engineering challenges and innovation. Sponsored by AICT Atal Academy from 13th to 17th September 2021. Professor Ashutosh Kumar. Professor Ashutosh Kumar is working as a professor in the Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Bombay, Mumbai. His work involves the study of structure and mechanism of action of protein complexes such as SCF complex and specialized nucleosomes and amyloids using state-of-art solid state and solution state NMR spectroscopy, along with other biophysical tools. His significant contribution is in developing NMR methods and implementing on complex biological macromolecules. His educational journey started in 1996 with BSc Chemistry honors from Faculty of Science, BHU, Varanasi, India. He did his PG in 1999, Chemistry from Department of Chemistry, Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi, India, and his PhD Chemistry from Department of Chemical Sciences, Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai, India. His vast experience involves postdoctoral research on solid state NMR group from Department of NMR Based Structural Biology, Max Planck Institute of Biophysical Chemistry, Germany. From 2011 till 2016, he worked as assistant professor in Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Bombay. Since 2016 till 2021, he was associate professor in Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Bombay. And presently he is working as professor in Department of Biosciences and Bioengineering, IIT Bombay. Sir, we feel honored and privileged to have you at this knowledge sharing platform. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Meenakshi. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Audible.
Okay, thank you. So sound and everything is fine, looking fine, right?
Yes, yes, fine.
Okay, fine. Dr. Gaur, for just letting me know that I have to give a talk, and I'll start without losing time. And anyone if you have any question at any point in time, don't wait. Just either raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask. If you are done with question, mute again yourself so that the minimal background noise is there. So thank you very much. And I come from Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay. In spite of being in Bombay, we have we are quite like a quite green campus with some wild animals coming in and living us, sometimes visiting us. They live just across the mountain, so they are occasional visitor to us. So all sorts of animals that you see here come to us. So today I'm going to share with you that how you can use NMR spectroscopy in drug discovery. My research field is mostly revolves around NMR spectroscopy. So this is our NMR spectrometer. Some of you might have seen and some you might not have seen, but this is NMR spectrometer that I use primarily. It's one of the powerful tool. Little bit theory I'm going to give you, not too much, but it is widely used in various fields, all the way from structural biology to the medicine to drug discovery and all those. So what I do in my lab, just briefly I'm going to tell you, is we develop new methods, NMR methods for looking the biological macromolecules. So this we are doing in solid state, like for biological solid sample. We also develop method for biological liquid sample, and for a macromolecular structure determination and dynamics determination by using like a new resonance assignment method, and then we apply those methods on looking at some of the complex protein. Just let me just put it down this. Yeah, somewhere. Okay, so we apply these methods to look at some of the complex biomolecular assemblies. Like one of these, we are looking at the ubiquitin E3 ligase. It's a multi-protein complex which is involved in targeted protein degradation and do the protein quality control. So these kind of complexes we look at. And other kind of complex that we look at is amyloids. You might be knowing that these amyloids are protein aggregates, and that gets deposited in brain, and that cause the cellular toxicity either in the neurons or even in type 2 diabetes. So we look at the structure function toxicity relation of proteins that forms the amyloids. And finally, we are looking at some of the nucleic acid protein complex called nucleosome, the dynamics associated with this. So this is kind of a DNA packaging machinery that we have in our cells. So DNA wraps around this 4x2 like 8-mer protein complex, and that's how they function. So I'm not going to talk to you anything about any of these projects. If you have any interest, we can talk after the lecture. So today our main focus is on pharma. That's your core strength. So how and what NMR can do for the pharma industry. So let's start with a very basic question. What a pharma industry does, what they actually looking for. So they actually identify a disease specific drug, right? Any disease that you can think of, they identify a disease specific drug. The next and most important thing that they do synthesize these drug molecules or their analog, so that this specific drug can bind to a protein and then do the further cascading effect on the system. So some of the drugs that we know, that we commonly use, so for pain, morphine, or say for malaria, this quinine, right? So these are the chemical moiety that has been identified and that binds to some protein also. So for heart failure, digitoxin, and recently this was the talk of the town last year, right? Hydroxychloroquine. Actually, it's a malaria drug, but now people thought that it could be also useful in COVID. So these are the molecules that pharma industry wants to synthesize because they work against a particular kind of a protein and either bind, change conformation, or do something, right? So and then they start modifying, like a quinine was modified to make it hydroxychloroquine, or so, like so and so forth, so that you can accelerate the potency of these molecules. So that's the whole idea of a pharma industry. So identifying disease specific identification of disease target specific drug. Now what happens, this all drugs, most of the drugs binds to a receptor which is a protein. Now receptor and drug interaction mostly happens via shape recognition. So there is an active site or active surface in a protein molecule. There these molecules that we are synthesizing will bind. Now that's what I am calling it shape recognition. So here if you look at active surface of this protein is a kind of triangular shape. So one need to synthesize a molecule that looks triangular shape and it can bind here. Now if you take a circular shape drug, it will not bind, it will not fit it. So active surface will bind and then form a complex. The other mechanism can be also that the active site conformation changes and that fits the drug. There are two mechanisms generally, you might like this, we have all studied in our undergraduates. This is called lock key mechanism. So you have a shape of a lock and where key can fit it. The second one is called induced fit, where the conformational change in the protein can bring the appropriate binding mechanism. So that's an induced fit. So this kind of drug protein interaction is generally known for the drug binding. Now, this is the basic concept. So how the drug development process proceeds? So we start with a discovery lead candidate. We start to say millions of compounds, and we try to look at, for a particular like a disease, we know the protein target, and then we start looking at the molecule that can bind and actually do the effect. So that is called discovery lead candidate. So once we identify a lead candidate, then we can start developing that drug candidate. So that will be drug development of drug candidates. Then we like in this, we start with a target identification for a pain, for heart failure, or for any other disease. What is the protein target? Which protein we are targeting? Which biomolecules essentially we are targeting? So that is the first step, target identification. With that target, we go for a lead discovery, and then we identify from the series of compounds which is the lead. Then we do the lead optimization. Then we go for preclinical, clinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. After all these, we go for approval of market. So generally, it's a kind of a funneling effect. You start with a very broad base, and finally you will end up with 1 or 2 molecules. It takes years and years of years, all these phases, so 7 to 15 years, and money is billions of dollars, right? So you can think that any drug where the time investment is about 15 years and money is billions of dollars. That's why the any original drug costs that much, like very high, because they have to recover the cost that the company has invested into that. So it cannot be cheaper. Now the cheaper are the generic drugs that many companies in India they make. So this is the kind of steps involved in drug development process. And for this, the first one is target identification, which target you are going to see. So for target identification, you need both 3D structure of a protein target, and 3D structure of a drug molecule. Now this 3D structure you need to identify, and there are various structural tools that helps us in identifying. So say if you take rifamycin, now if one has to, like, this molecule is not that simple. There are some groups which shows variability. Some group can be floppy. Those floppy and variable groups can be identified if you know the 3-dimensional structure of this molecule. So this is a small molecule, not that difficult. You can crystallize it, diffract it, and get the 3-dimensional structure. So that's what XYZ is shown. You can see some of the groups shows quite variation, and here. So once you start with a drug discovery process, you need to have a high resolution structure of these molecules, which portion is flexible, which portion is really rigid. And such structure can come from few of the structural biology technique. One is called X-ray crystallography, another say NMR spectroscopy. For X-ray crystallography, you need to crystallize these proteins. If you get a crystal, fine crystal, you can diffract, and using electron density map, you can get the structure of these molecules. Even in the structure, some looking at the electron density, an expert can identify which portion is flexible and which is really tight. So that helps us. Often what happens in the X-ray crystallography, the protons are missed, right? Here, if you look at here, generally proton are not, because the proton being a small, they don't give enough electron density, and that's how you only see for heavy metal, right? So protons are missed, one of the demerit for that. However, in NMR, the protons are actually essentially captured, which are really flexible moiety. So if your molecule is soluble, there is no problem. You can solubilize those and do solution state NMR. If the molecule is not soluble, you can go for solid state NMR. So in soluble molecule, you can just do this solid state NMR for those molecules. I just want to move this guy. Okay. Yeah, so we'll start with a basic concept of X-ray, you need to have a diffractometer and has to have a crystal. That crystal should diffract, and once you diffract that, you essentially get the spots electron density map, and that helps us in getting the structure. So a structure can be solved of a target protein with drug and without drug. So by knowing the structure, you know how the drug binds to a target protein. That's what X-ray does. Now, like here, for an example, suppose this drug is binding to protein. These are various residue in protein that binds. So looking at the electron density map, people found that this is the drug binding pocket, and here is the flexibility in the drug, here flexibility in the protein. And looking at the electron density map, they can get the drug orientation at very high resolution. So this is after the computational optimization, because that's just a guessing. Computational optimization is just a guessing. You really need to know the drug protein interaction and elucidate the structure of a free protein as well as drug bound protein. So drug bound protein, even after binding, it should fall into Ramachandran plot and show a nice dispersion in the Ramachandran plot. There should not be disallowed region. So now we know that how drug is binding and what it does after binding, right? Many of these techniques, X-ray based techniques, were used for drug bound protein structure. One of them is HIV1 protease, right? So HIV1 protease, it's a protease that auto catalyzed itself. Now here is a flap region that essentially what it does, basically this opens and drug comes and binds. So catalytic site is this. So you know the structure first. By stabilizing this protein, you solve the structure. Now, and you know that this is auto catalyzing. So for virus not to act, HIV protease has to be inactivated, right? So inactivating can be done if you just block its catalytic site. How we can block it? We know the structure of this protease. Now, can we come up with some molecule that essentially binds at the catalytic site and inhibits the action of the catalytic action of this protease? So people solve this structure with MVT bound, and it essentially it engages these residue isoleucine 50 prime here, and this molecule MVT essentially goes and bind in the catalytic site, and that was shown that once you have this drug, probably HIV protease will not work, and therefore HIV can be inactivated. Now that came because we were able to solve the high resolution structure. Now in all these, other than structure, the another important parameter that comes is thermodynamics and dynamics of the protein. As I mentioned here, this flap, red and green flap, opens and something can come and bound. And this opening and closing is dynamic control, and also thermodynamics plays a role. So we need to also understand the dynamics associated with this and what kind of thermodynamic parameter plays an important binding. So because you see the conformational change is happening. So there is a inactive form and bioactive conformation of a protein. So there is a conformational energy as well as entropy associated with this. So after the drug binding, it has to be favorable, right? We know from basic thermodynamics, delta G should be favorable for drug to bind here and get stabilized. And during binding also, it is possible that some conformation of protein can change or drug can change. So that should be also compensated by thermodynamics. So essentially drug binding has to be favorable for its action, and dynamics should also favor. So we learned that structure is important for the drug binding. Structure is important for the drug binding, as well as dynamics is important for the drug binding, and thermodynamically favorable parameters should also be leading to drug protein interaction. So all these structure, dynamics and thermodynamics contributes towards drug protein interaction. So when we are going for a drug discovery, we need to take care of all these three important concepts. Little bit more about protein dynamics. You can see here I'm just giving you two examples of protein dynamics. one example is like here loop is opened and then loop is bound with an antagonist. One can see here protein is moving quite a bit. Now such conformational change is associated like it's an intrinsic nature of a protein. So when we are doing a precise drug discovery, we need to account for such motion, then only our drug can bind and be stable. So that's what, just to give you an idea that solving the three-dimensional structure of a protein is essentially important. But other than the structure, you need to have account for the dynamics that protein can play, because drug has to bind and be there to perform its action. It's not that the protein with conformational change, it should just throw it out or just remove it. And the binding of drugs should be also thermodynamically favorable. So next, we are going to look at what kind of motion that protein can have. Protein is very dynamic. Protein has very dynamic personality. It has motion all the way, ranging from picosecond time scale to second time scale, or in frequency term, you can say terahertz to hertz. There are various phenomena associated with these motions. So like a very faster motion, you have a bond vibration, side chain liberation, molecular tumbling, and then you have a little slower domain motion, the protein folding, and so on and so forth. And so one can classify these motions: local flexibility as well as collective motion, like your domain movement can be collective motion. So these basically these local motion as well as global motion has to be accounted. Now that actually all forms the structure function paradigm. So structure along with the folding function and dynamics forms the structure function paradigm. So now I just in last 15 minutes or so, I emphasized to you that dynamics is extremely important when we are going to have drug protein interaction. So how to capture this dynamics in a real time, when drug is bound and when drug is not bound. So that dynamics, how we can explore it. And here comes the NMR spectroscopy. Now NMR, nuclear magnetic resonance, basically it's a one technique that late Richard Ernst, who got Nobel Prize in chemistry for NMR, he says, because this is the hardly any because there is hardly any technique so informative and so many type of application, because no other technique provides so much fun, not only information, but you can really enjoy doing experiment with this. So what kind of experiment and what kind of molecules we can look using NMR spectroscopy? So all sorts of molecules we can look, whether it is soluble protein or peptide, or protein liposome, proteoliposome, whether it is in powder form, frozen form, microcrystalline, hydrogel, precipitate, aggregates, and biopolymer. All sorts of these forms possibly we can look at using NMR spectroscopy. There is one common feature in all these forms of protein, but all of them has a spin, and this spin is generally exploited in NMR spectroscopy. Proton spin or carbon spin can be exploited in these NMR spectroscopy. So what we do, we take these spins or these molecules, whatever we just looked at in the previous slide. So take any of these forms, whether your drug is in soluble form or in a proteoliposome form or powder form, any of these you can take it, put in a high magnetic field. This is an NMR spectrometer. And because of this high magnetic field, the spins will be oriented either along the magnetic field or against the magnetic field. It forms the energy level here. One can see that there is an energy difference between these two states, the up state and down state. Now you have to provide an irradiation which is in B1 field perpendicular to this, and that excites from ground state to excited state. And once the spins goes to excited state, they relax back. And then that relaxation, you can measure it in terms of the current called free induction decay. And if you Fourier transform those, you can get the frequency domain data, which is the characteristic for these spins. So that's how basically NMR is done. Take all those molecules, put in a magnetic field. Because of magnetic field, energy levels are created, and then you have to apply an external RF. That external RF creates the resonance condition, and then when spins relax back, you get free induction decay, that you do Fourier transform and get frequency domain data. That's what essentially captured. And these frequency domain data is a characteristic for a spin. So if you have an alcohol molecule, which I'm showing you, or any other like a cartenoxide diester, so here you can see there are so many protons here. Each proton has a different resonance frequency. So now if we record this NMR spectrum, we know that these protons correspond to these peaks, these protons correspond to this peak, here CH2 proton correspond to this, and CH proton correspond to it. So we know now which all protons correspond to which peaks. Now that's the beauty. Now if we have a drug like this, we do NMR spectroscopy, we have a signature for each proton here, right? So we can go from a drug molecule to atom molecule, looking at the atomic resolution, what happening to these drug molecules. This is just 1D. We can extend this information in two-dimensional NMR, where we have a two-dimensional NMR spectroscopy, where we have a second domain. So essentially, you, instead of recording one experiment, you record series of experiments and do the double Fourier transform. So here you get a correlation peak. One axis is direct dimension coming from here, here second dimension, and correlation giving you for a particular peak. So from one dimensional you can go to two dimensional, and that gives the more resolution. So for an example, cyclosporine, here if you look at the peaks, looks a little crowded, but each of these protons are represented here. And if you do the 2D, one can see now peaks are very nicely dispersed. This gives us an idea that which proton is where, and we can show the correlation of each of these proteins, and helps us in identifying now each protein, each proton or hydrogen in this cyclosporine molecule. So that's beautifully dispersed spectrum that we have coming from the 2D. Now, any question up to this point? Then I will move to little more complicated concept. Go ahead if you have any question, any of you, unmute and ask.
No questions also. Any questions from participant, please? So there is no questions, I think, very well explained.
Okay.
Thank you,
fine.
sir. Thank
Okay,
you, sir. Thank you, sir. I'm sure that our delegates will be definitely benefited by your presentation.
Okay, so I'll move forward then. Yeah, I'll continue. In between, I just, because too many things at a time will be difficult, so I just take a small pause. You can frame your question if you have, and just let me know. I'll again take pause after 15 minutes or 10 minutes. Okay, fine. So now we got the spectrum, but how did the spectrum translate into a structure of a drug molecule? So you, for getting structure, from getting an information from these, Raj Kumari has raised a hand. Dr. Raj Kumari, you can go ahead. Dr. Raj Kumari. Oh, okay, just. Dr. Meenakshi.
Yes, sir. Sir,
can you unmute to few of them, because Vikas Sharma is saying that we are not allowed to unmute. Maybe you can just give him chance to ask question. And also Dr. Raj Kumari was saying that she wants to ask.
So one question is from Rajiv J. Could you explain 2D NMR again?
I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. So can you take the question from others so that I can.
बोली थी वो हैंड रेस कैसे हो गया?
Okay. Yeah. Rajiv, let's first start with 1D. Okay. So here is say my molecule. Now structure here is CH3, CH, double bond here, CO, I think CO, CH2 and CH3. Now these three, this is methyl group, right? CH3 is showing the spectrum here. This methyl is showing a spectrum here. This CH2 is here and CH is here. So now we can see, and this CH is here. So for each proton, we have a different resonance frequency in one-dimensional spectrum, right? Now that's, and splitting comes from something called J coupling. This is little concept. So depending upon how many protons are in the neighbor of this. So if there's CH3, it will be splitted into two because it has a CH in the neighboring group. So this splitting depends upon neighboring effect, and the chemical shift depends upon its shielding and de-shielding effect. That's generally we have in NMR. But moving from here, 1D to 2D. So 1D is just apply a pulse and record the response. That's what 1D we are doing. So like if you look at here, we put this molecule in the magnet, energy level is created, we apply a pulse here, apply a pulse means short radio frequency pulse, and then we remove that pulse quickly, 5 microsecond we applied a pulse, and then look at the effect of those. So it gives the current which decays with time. This is time decaying function. So this time domain data can be Fourier transform to frequency domain data. Now each proton has different frequency. That's what we saw in the next class. Next slide. So here is one frequency, another frequency, third, fourth, 5 for all these 5 protons. Now many times if molecule size and complexity increases, this one dimension is not enough. So we need to do 2-dimensional spectrum experiments where we have 2 time domain data and also 2 frequency domain data. So what essentially we are doing, we are extending the 1D in various in another dimension. So here you are doing series of 1D. The first is waiting period, then you apply a pulse and detect it. In this next experiment, we are doing the preparation, wait for some time, then mix the frequency and detect it. So if you look at here, what I'm doing, I'm creating another time domain data by increasing this wait period. During this wait period, the spins are evolving, like evolving, they are doing something like this, because in magnetic field, they are not sitting idle. They do a precessional motion along the magnetic field. So that creates another time domain data or frequency domain data. So here is this is called indirect domain, this is called direct domain. Now you have 2 time domain data and frequency domain data. So if you do double Fourier transform, this time domain data can be represented in the frequency domain, and if peaks are correlated, you get a peak at the joint frequency that is evolved here. So in this axis, it represents the omega-2 frequency. In this axis, it represents the omega-1 frequency. Right. So yeah, so that's what is 2D. A series of 1D is recorded, and then we have to do double Fourier transform to come up to the 2D, 2-dimensional data. Is it okay, Rajiv? So like if you take this molecule here, you see that lots of crowding is happening. This is still okay, but if you do 2D, you can see the peaks are now dispersed. So you know that this peak is correlation between this peak and this peak, and that's how you can identify each of these protons using 2-dimensional experiment. Okay. Fine. So yeah, should I move, Dr. Meenakshi, or do you have any other questions?
Yes, sir, you can.
Fine. So that's a identifying each of these resonances, but identification is not enough. Can we get the three-dimensional structure of this? So getting the three-dimensional structure, we need to know the angle between these bonds, that is called dihedral angle, which is given by something called scalar coupling. And then we need to know the electronic involvement of each of these moiety, which is given by the chemical shift, this shift due to chemical involvement, that's called chemical shift, and then dihedral angle. So if in experiments we can find it out by doing some of the 2D experiment, something called like a total correlation spectroscopy like TOCSY, and heteronuclear single quantum coherence, that's a proton carbon correlation, here is a proton proton correlation, then we can identify each of these peaks. For an example, if we are doing this TOCSY for cyclosporine, we can identify the 1' is connected to like a 2', 3', 4' or so. And here all these NH peaks or CH peaks can be identified. So now by doing such experiment, we are identifying each of these protons and associated carbon or nitrogen. And that's how it helps us in getting their chemical involvement. So after that, we have to do some calculation like after identification. So chemical shift, which is very sensitive to local change in environment, one can get it. Then we can get their splitting pattern by something called J coupling, so through bond correlation or dihedral angle. And then we can measure the distance between them, which is called nuclear Overhauser effect, by using nuclear Overhauser effect spectroscopy. So this proton through a space distance we can measure up to 5 angstrom or so. So this gives the distance constraints between these atoms. And even we can measure the bond vector angle, that is given by something called dipolar coupling. So using all these information, the chemical shift, scalar coupling, the distance between them, and bond vector, one can essentially get the three-dimensional structure of a drug that I showed you using NMR spectroscopy. Rapamycin does not look like this, but it has a certain motion and it looks more like this. So using NMR spectroscopy, doing series of these experiments which measure the chemical involvement, the angle between them, the distance between them, and bond vector orientation, one can get a high resolution three-dimensional structure of a molecule. That's good. So we got a structure. What next? You know, in pharma and drug sector, there's one big problem. When these guys synthesize a molecule, they always get something called like a mixture of two enantiomer, S enantiomer and R enantiomer. And since the chemical structure is same, they have problem in identifying whether their compound is enantiopure or not. If there is a mixture, it's a big problem, right? If you look at these two R and S form of a drug, S enantiomer causes birth defect, while R enantiomer causes morning sickness. So बिना प्यूरिफाई किए अगर ड्रग दे दिया गया तो जिसको बर्थ डिफेक्ट कंट्रोल करना था उसका मॉर्निंग सिकनेस होने लगेगा. So pharma industry has to, or people working in pharma field have to get these molecules enantiopure. Similarly, like you can see this RR ethamabutol, actually this causes blindness, and the other is used for tuberculosis. So if we want to tuberculosis, we should make sure that it is SS form rather than RR form. RR form agar gadbad se ho gaya, then it's causing blindness. So now it will create more harm than treating a disease. So getting enantiopure drug is very important, and there actually NMR plays a very critical role in identifying and fixing the correct orientation or correct the enantiomer of a drug. How it is done? So essentially you orient your drug molecule in aligning media and you measure something called residual dipolar coupling, which is D. So essentially all the drug has a scalar coupling, but if you orient them like in solution, they are tumbling. So this dipolar coupling is averaged out. you only get a scalar coupling. But if you orient little bit, you get J plus D, which is dipolar coupling. And this dipolar coupling helps us in getting the bond vector orientation. Now one can measure this bond vector orientation, and this bond vector orientation helps us in identifying the correct enantiomer of these molecules, right? So this helps in identifying whether this drug is for R form, S form, whatever, or it's a mixture. That is a really great thing that one can do it by doing the simple experiments where you put your drug molecule in like a partially orienting media, and you can measure this dipolar coupling, fix the orientation of each of these bond vector to identify whether my molecule is R or S or it's a mixture. If it is a mixture, you can go and tell your chemist, purify more, you are not yet ready for formulation. Okay, so that's what we can do. Good. So now I will switch gear. So we have looked at the small molecule based like a NMR. We can now slightly shift the gear and go to protein molecule, how to do the protein NMR structure also. So any question up to this point? I'll take again 1-2 minute break to see if you have any question.
Sir,
Yes.
one question is from Dr. Rajkumari. How do we resolve peak picking in protein noisy spectrum?
Protein noisy.
Yes.
Protein, I'm coming. We have just gone to small molecule. Protein, just a minute, I'm coming. Wait for 5 minutes. Yes.
One more question is from Tanuja. It is possible to determine unit cell using NMR?
No, it's not a crystal, right? It's solution. So unit cell you do in crystallography. So there is some techniques that developing called NMR crystallography where probably you can do, but mostly that is we work with a soluble molecules where you don't have a unit cell, right? It's a freely tumbling molecules.
So no more questions.
Fine. So we'll move to
Yes.
now target structure determination. That was drug structure determination. Now we go to protein. So essentially what we have to do, that how from a primary sequence of a protein can go to 3-dimensional 4-digit structure. What it takes from going from the 1-dimensional amino acid sequence to compact 3-dimensional structure. So there are these 5-6 steps to get from here to here. First, you need to prepare the sample of protein. Next step is collecting a series of data. Then coming to assignment of those peaks, analysis of this data. Then one has to generate resistance and calculate the structure and validate the structure. That's what it takes from going from a sequence to a spectra to the structure. And for that, Professor Kutruthrik got a Nobel Prize in chemistry in 2002 because he convincingly established the NMR as a tool for protein structure determination. So the first step, basically you have to bacterially express your system. You have to come up with a pure protein, right? You just need to check my protein is pure. So here say GST, some protein called UBA. Your protein has to have a single band on gel. It's a pure protein. For NMR spectroscopy, since carbon 12 is NMR inactive, so you have to feed your bacteria with carbon 13 and N15 so that it can produce the labeled protein. So once you produce the labeled protein and purify protein, you are all set to go for NMR spectroscopy for a protein molecule. So the first experiment you can just do 1D. You can see this is the 1-dimensional spectrum of a protein. So complicated, right? You have to assign each of these peaks. So if you are a faculty and going to give this assignment just 1D to a new graduate student, he will run away from your lab, right? So this is complicated. So one has to think for a simpler method. And how we can do is by recording that expanding this one-dimensional data into two-dimensional or three-dimensional. Now you see the two-dimensional or three-dimensional data can be expanded, and now this data extraction, information extraction will be much easier. So from one dimension we go to two or three dimension, where one axis is proton, second axis can be carbon, third axis can be nitrogen, and that's what we do, the three-dimensional spectrum of a protein molecule. So that helps us in getting the all the resonances and assignment as well as distances. So we measure the distance from each proton to another proton, and then we know that where are these distances. So that's a distance generation, and using those distances we generate thousands of distances, and then one can calculate the structure by a method called stimulated annealing, and we can get the structure as well as dynamics of a protein of easily 30-40 kilodalton. So one can see here not only structure but also dynamics encoded. So this portion here, the convergence is low. It's saying that protein had here, the protein side chains or main chain also has lots of dynamics. One can see here loops has dynamics, whereas these portions are well folded. So NMR in solution gives the protein structure together with the dynamics. That's a good part of the NMR spectroscopy. Now we know even briefly that how the protein structure can be determined. The question was how we can remove the noise from the spectrum, right? So there are two ideas. You can just increase the signal to noise so that you can clearly see this is the signal and this is the noise. So essentially that can be done by taking more sample or recording a more like a longer acquisition where you have a more signal averaging. So you put more number of scans, so signal to noise is better. Noise cancels and signal sides up. So only by two, increasing the concentration of protein or acquiring more like a longer time gives you a better signal to noise. I think that was the question, right? Dr. Rajkumari.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Thanks. Okay. So we have protein, we have ligand. Now next problem comes, can we understand the ligand protein interaction? So as you know, secret of life is molecular recognition. Everything in the life is just about molecular recognition. The ability of one molecule to recognize another molecule through weak bonding interaction, that's how the lives and everything moves. So ligand protein interaction that briefly we discussed, we have a ligand, we have a protein, there is shape recognition that happens, and that shape recognition happens by intermolecular forces. Many times just lock-key, sometimes it is induced fit, and conformational selection is the three method that can happen. So there is a change in the conformation, there is a affinity, and there is a biological response associated with that. So how we can investigate all of these using NMR spectroscopy. So basically NMR monitors the different physical property that exist between a protein and a ligand. So we can investigate on both sides, either on the ligand side or on protein side or protein complex. So suppose this is a bulkier molecule, which is protein, and here we have a ligand molecule. Now how we can use this tool to exploit the property of this, looking at what happens when they form a complex. So ligand is a small molecule, therefore it's a fast diffusing, slowly relaxing, and it gives something called positive NOE, nuclear Overhauser effect. And there is, since it's small molecule, so the magnetization due to spin diffusion is very less. Now coming to bigger protein molecule, since it is big, so it's a slowly diffusing, fast relaxing, and it has a negative NOE, and it has a fast spin diffusion. When they make complex, this small molecule binds to a bigger molecule. Now everything gets like immobilized. So now it will have the fast relaxation, slow diffusion, negative NOE, and fast spin diffusion. You can look at this portion now gets immobilized. So all the signal coming from here, you can distinguish from here to here, and that looking at the signal, you know that now this is in complex. So one can use various parameters for ligand protein interaction. ligand-based method and protein-based method. Ligand-based method, you can look at the chemical shift of these molecules, right? You can look at the relaxation property of these spins, like a spin or spin lattice relaxation, or you can also measure the diffusion coefficient, like how they are diffusing and how they are transferring their magnetization to other molecules. In a protein-based method, it relies on the structural and functional property of the protein. You can look the chemical environment of many resonances that are engaged in ligand protein interaction, how they are shifting. So this is called chemical shift SAR by NMR spectroscopy. By recording two-dimensional spectrum, you can look at how they are changing. Okay, so here are some examples that you can use for identifying the ligand protein interaction. One of the techniques called saturation transfer difference. I'll explain you briefly what actually we are doing here. So this is a big molecule, this is small molecule, any drug molecule that we had discussed in last half an hour, we can take this. Each of these has a proton, right? Here we have a sharp line, here we have a broad line. So ligand and protein are interacting. Let's just detect ligand for the moment, we forget about protein. Suppose this ligand protein interaction is happening at fast exchanges, binding going, that's what mainly you want, bind and go at a microsecond time scale. So drug should not bind and stay there. Bind, do it work, go. So that has to be fast in microsecond time scale. Now in the experiment that we are going to do is saturate the signal from the protein and look the effect of that saturation on a ligand resonance. This, suppose this is invisible signal and this is visible signal. So we saturate this something here and look at the effect on the ligand signal. So since they are interacting, there will be effect transferred because of the proximity. So here now we had a we are saturating here and looking at the effect. So if they are interacting, the signal intensity will decay. Now signal intensity decay will say that these protons are directly engaged with a protein binding. These resonances from ligand are directly engaged in the binding with protein. So protein is only like a shart here or constraint here that the binding should be in micromolar range, and generally you have to have a small ligand and a big target. So that's what basically is done. Essentially you have a folded protein, you saturate some signal using this pulse sequence. So here is a reference spectrum, here is a STD experiment. By saturating you get it, and then you take a difference, and if they are binding you see a perturbation in the resonance. If they are not binding you don't see anything. So you see this method is quickly like enables us, this can be done in a second. This method enables us for a quick scanning of the molecules that will bind to a particular target. You just need a micro, like a very few micromolar of protein, and one by one ligand you add it, do this experiment, find it out, this is a binder or this is not a binder, and then you can experimentally validate the drug candidates that can bind to a target. So here is the this molecule we are taking, it binds. So we did STD NMR. So without doing anything, you get a signal for each of these protons. So A, B, C, D are written here. And when you do STD, you find that signal that are getting perturbed, like if you take a difference, the signal that are getting perturbed is D, E, F. So this drug molecule is binding to protein through this side. So if you want to make a better drug, you add some YT here, here, and here. That makes it tighter. And again, you can do the experiment, STD experiment within minutes to find it out whether it has improved efficacy or not improved efficacy. So essentially by doing this experiment, we found a binding epitope of a ligand to the receptor, and one can achieve very high sensitivity. Precisely, accurately, using this simple tool, one can identify the binder to a protein. Okay. So this is something like we have a two like a version of methyltryptophan, 6-methyltryptophan, 7-methyltryptophan. One of them binds to a receptor. So we recorded this STD experiment and we found that only in one of them structure is coming, which is kind of like a, you can see this red is shown from the 7 and black is shown in the 6. One can identify here only black seems to be binding, red is not binding. So one can see even little variation, you can easily identify which is the binder, which is not binder. Right, so that's a STD spectrum. You can get it easily identify from soup of the molecules which binds and which does not bind. So here red is ligand, black is blue is non-ligand. Okay, so to summarize, this is a technique, ligand based NMR screening experiment to determine in a quantitative manner which compound binds to protein in context of drug discovery and which does not bind. Now ligand mapping, one can do more advanced experiment to find it out actually epitopes, and one can determine the dissociation constant of protein to ligand. That was about protein ligand interaction, looking at the ligand, quickly, precisely determining the binding epitope on the ligand. Any question up to this point?
Sir, one question.
Mm-hmm.
It is from Rahul S. Sir, he's working on antibody, antigen, and its interaction with nanomaterials.
Okay.
Can they interaction, or this technique could be used to confer these interactions?
Yeah, any technique which has a binding, like any molecule, small molecule and drug that has a binding constant about micromolar, you can use this technique to identify. And that is possible. The only condition is your binding constant should be in micromolar range. And I don't know what nanomaterials or nanoparticle he is using, how many protons it has. So suppose he has make a nano particle for a drug molecule, essentially one can look at, there is no problem with that.
So no more questions.
Okay. So moving ahead, like one can now, other than that, one can do the line width analysis that changes upon protein binding. So lines, sharp lines here, whatever I just showed. Upon ligand binding, they can be little broader. So one can do it, just look at the line width and that one can identify. Small molecule has a sharp line width and protein has a broad line width. So if a small molecule binds to protein, you have a like total complex become larger and you have a broader line width. Like just looking at the line width, here is small molecule, here is a large molecule. For free ligand, you have a sharp line. When it bounds, you have a broad line. So looking at this one also, one can identify that whether this binds or does not bind. Over the year, various techniques has been developed for drug protein interaction, looking at the ligand, the chemical shift line width, that gives you idea. There is a method called InPharma that essentially exploits the active site identification of the bound conformation. Then relaxation time T1 and T2, the STD that I discussed with you, and there are transfer NOE and water loxy I did not discuss. These are various techniques in NMR that identify the ligand protein interaction. Okay, yeah. So now coming back to how you can find it out on protein where ligand is binding, right? So let's take a protein molecule. Only like a condition that you have to probably record the two-dimensional spectrum. 1D is like can be there, but there are too much overlap in signal that will not give you enough information. So suppose I have taken a protein, I have recorded an N15, like we labeled this protein in bacteria, we recorded a N15 protein correlation, proton correlation spectrum. So here each peak is giving resonance for one NH, right? So you have one NH in each amino acid, that amide bonds UNH, right? So each NH is giving one dot here. Now suppose this molecule this protein molecule binding to this small molecule, whether it is metal or it is a small molecule, whatever. Then what we see that selectively few peaks seems to be shifted, like here 119, 122, 125. So like one can, like you can see zooming. So with a concentration dependent manner, this is shifting. Here it is shifting. Here they are shifting. Here they are shifting. So now we are sure that not whole protein, but these amino acid 119, 120 to 122, 125 is forming the active site for this molecular binding. Now we identify on protein where interaction is happening. Right, so one can like do some more experiment called transfer NOE, where we can get the signature for the binding. I will not explain that in detail. So now that helps is in doing something called fragment based drug design. So we take these molecules and then we see where it is binding, then we take another molecule, fit it here, look at the signal of these molecules, and then one can link it, and by linking it we can grow the drug molecule. So that's called fragment based drug discovery, by merging it. And that's how you can make an improved drug based on the experimental evidences. So that's about how you use information coming from protein as well as ligand for doing the drug discovery and drug design. Now again I'll shift gear a little bit and show you some of the example where one can look at these drug discovery using solid and solution state NMR. So I'll give an example for anti-cancer drug. We know that microtubules are important for cell division, right? So many of the cancer drugs are targeted towards this microtubule, because what it does, basically it forms the focal point, which basically separates this DNA. So if you can exploit this chemistry or structural aspect here, you can come up with a better drug. So essentially, tubulin is a polymeric assembly that goes from dimer of tubulin to microtubules, and it's a dynamic assembly. It has a like a growing end and shrinking end. So there are various molecules over the year that have been discovered which binds to plus end and some binds to minus end, and they either stabilize the microtubule assembly or destabilize the microtubule assembly. So by doing any of the dynamic stability, if you perturb dynamic instability, if you perturb in microtubule, you can come up with a cancer drug. That's what many of the cancer drugs are done. Paclitaxel, many of us will be knowing, actually this is microtubule targeted therapy. There are many drugs, that vancomycin and indubulin, many drugs has been discovered which perturbs basically tubulin. Tubulin inhibitor interface with microtubule assembly or disassembly are anti-cancer drug. So here is a paclitaxel. Now in this regard, we have, like long back, we have worked with a molecule called epithelone that also seems to be doing something with microtubule. I'm just going to tell you what it does. So it binds to monomeric tubulin. Here epithelone binding is this, it binds to monomeric tubulin and it perturbs the assembly of this tubulin into microtubule, right? So it has this binding site. Now the structure of this was solved in 2005. They found a nice groove. This was electron crystallography structure of tubulin binds to microtubule. So here is a structure. You can see there is a nice groove, and using electron crystallography, they found that epithelone binds here. Whereas solution state NMR, they found that binding orientation is different. It binds in a slightly tilted way. So we thought, why don't we take actually the conformation of microtubule, not in solution, not in crystallography, but actually in the microtubule bound state, because these two, the EC and NMR mode, seems to be very different. You can see here it's a groove that binds, it's tilted. So one can have a different orientation of microtubules, a very contrasting image that both of these techniques produce. So we took this epithelone And we thought of doing this experiment in the native state, neither fixing it using crystallography nor letting it insoluble so that it exchanges with solvent. So we will take the microtubule bound to this drug and record the spectrum as it is. So we employed this solid state NMR structure. So X-ray crystallography was this, and solid state NMR structure, we recorded the carbon-carbon correlation spectrum, solved the molecule, this molecule orientation. You can find that black is essentially crystallography structure, the brown is solid state NMR structure. One can see this ring seems to be orienting different. Their side chain orientation also seems to be disagreeing with X-ray structure. So we have a high resolution structure coming from solid state and very sharp line that were originated. So it took some 13 syllable of this molecule, immobilized with a microtubule. So here is a microtubule, and somewhere here drugs are doped. And then we recorded again the drug bound conformation of the microtubule compared with free form of the this epithelion, and then we find it out where actually it shows perturbation. So using this perturbation, we modeled it, and what we found that actually in real case, neither this is the correct conformation of a drug nor this is correct conformation of a drug, but somewhere in between it falls. So that's what we found, drug bound conformation of epithelium with microtubule using solid state NMR. Okay, so again, questions?
Sir, one question is from Sandhya Balraj. She wants to know, the STD NMR can be used for the large molecules like biomolecules?
Yes. How big is your large molecule? So STD generally requires two kind of molecule. One is small molecule, and it is exchanging with a large molecule. So you generally look at the small molecule. For large molecule, you can do other techniques, not STD.
Okay, no more questions.
Okay, thank you. So briefly, I'm going to talk about NMR application in pharma industry. So I just looked at the structural elucidation. We also looked at the lead optimization and binding site location using chemical shift perturbation and compound screening. All of these essentially can be done using NMR spectroscopy. So briefly about biopharmaceutical, it's of origin of biological origin. Any virus, therapeutic serum, toxin, antitoxin, all these can be called a biopharmaceutical. They are derived from living source, either cultured bacteria, yeast or cell, human cell or animal source, or like any therapeutics protein or therapeutics protein, they are called biopharmaceutical. So it can range from a small molecule drugs like insulin liraglutide to a big molecules like a monoclonal antibody and some intermediate filgrastim. All these collectively are basically called biopharmaceutical. So problem is that, can we detect these using various NMR techniques? Yes, we can do. And one can look at in the formulated state. So here are some 2D spectrum of formulated biopharmaceutical. You can get a clean spectrum of this biopharmaceutical in the native state. Even one can look at bigger molecules like monoclonal antibody, which is like a very big. The only issue that here we are just exploiting the methyl groups on these, and we can get a beautiful spectrum of this monoclonal antibody. So now each peaks represent one of these balls here, whatever you see. So essentially, even at the bigger molecules like monoclonal antibody, one can exploit this to do these NMR spectroscopy. So to conclude, now whatever we discussed in last one hour or so, so NMR spectroscopy is an excellent tool for pharmaceutical application. One can use for ligand and target-based experiment. Information on binding epitope of the lead molecule can be identified. I discussed with you STD NMR. Now information on the binding pocket and site of protein is also possible. And essentially you can show the higher order structure of a drug molecule, or even you can show the biosimilarity. And one can do experiment even with 200 kilodalton using some techniques called methyl based experiment for monoclonal antibody. So NMR is a wide range application of NMR has a wide range of application in pharma and biopharma industry. Yeah, thank you very much for your patience, and I look forward to have question from you. That's it, Dr. Meenakshi.
Yes, sir. Still no questions? Thank you, sir. We all are definitely benefited by your presentation, and you have made us learn to determine 3D structure of molecule by calculating chemical shift, coupling constant, dipolar coupling using NMR in simple 5-step. You described the protein structure determination by NMR. Also enlightened the delegates with the advanced techniques like multi-dimensional NMR, and such a great presentation. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.